Hello, everybody. Now, Lucy Letby was convicted in August 2023 of 6 murders and 8 attempted murders. Right from the very beginning, I thought there was something very, very wrong with the case, with the verdicts, and with the response or reaction to the verdicts, where back in the summer of 2023, a lot of people, including some people that I know who work in media, expressed a complete outpouring of hate against this nurse, this young nurse, who had been, in my opinion, set up to take the fall for gross incompetence and things going wrong in the neonatal ward where she worked at the Countess of Chester Hospital. I didn't believe that she was guilty, at the time. I wasn't 100% certain, but now I am absolutely 100% certain that Lucy Letby is innocent. She's been set up as the patsy and the scapegoat for incompetence and bad medical practice in her ward and in her hospital. And she should be set free immediately. She shouldn't spend another day or night in the hell of jail that she's been in for something like 5 years now, because she was arrested and she's been held on remand she was held on remand for about 3.5 years before the judgment and the sentencing in her case. But from the evidence that was given in her case, it was very clear that a lot of it was dodgy, not least the dodgy spreadsheet that I pointed out at the time, and many people pointed out at the time. The jury was presented with a spreadsheet showing that she was present in every single case of a baby dying on the wards. 8 cases were actually, even with freedom of information requests at the time, you could see that there were many more than 8 babies who had sadly died in that ward at the time. But now, with this press conference that happened yesterday, more about that later, it's clear there were 18 babies that died in the period that they looked at in her trial. Something like the summer of 2015 to 2016. And she was only on trial for 7 of those deaths. She was present at one of them, but the judge said they're not to consider that in the trial. But there were 18 babies that sadly died. There was a spike in babies dying at that particular ward, at that particular hospital, in that particular period. And the reasons for that are pretty clear. It was upgraded, so they were taking more babies in. They were taking more babies that were younger, born at an earlier period of gestation, 23, 24 weeks. Neonates born before the normal time of birth, certainly nowhere near 39 weeks of gestation, which is normal. But if you're born, babies born 22, 23, 24 weeks of gestation, they're very, very small, very, very fragile, very, very vulnerable. And sadly, some of them do sadly die because they are, they don't survive because they're born too early. But the hospitals, I'm sure, try to give them the best possible care that they can in most cases. But that didn't happen in this particular ward because they just had too many to cope with. They didn't have the extra staff to cope with it. It was crowded, it was busy, it was chaotic. And also, we heard at the trial itself that there was raw sewage around on the floors because there were sewage pipes in the ceilings that were leaking into the very rooms that some of these very vulnerable neonates were occupying. So there was very, very poor medical care, lots of things going wrong, and some of the doctors and the consultants didn't do what they needed to do to ensure some of the babies stayed alive. And that was what was brought out in this press conference yesterday about a report that 14 of the world's most eminent neonatal experts have been put together and working on for some time. And the conclusion they came to is that there was not a single murder in that ward when Lucy Letby was there. She is innocent. All of the deaths were due to poor medical care, and other things that were going on in the ward, perhaps like the sewage being on the floor in the place. But there was nothing to do with Lucy Letby. In fact, in one case, she actually reported that a tube had fallen out of the mouth of one of the babies, and tried to put things right. But in some of the specific cases, and all the babies were given letters in the trial to keep them anonymous, baby A, baby B, and so on. Baby K, they said here, Lucy Letby was accused of dislodging a breathing tube. And they say that's how a murder took place. But actually, what they found was the tube was never inserted properly in the first place by the doctor who was supposed to do it. So she's completely innocent in that particular accusation, and that's just one of the babies. All of the babies that were concerned there, where she was accused of something, every single one, even at the time, was just based on circumstantial evidence. There was no particular pattern. They said, oh, this is an air embolism, this is a tube that's dislodged, that's extra insulin. None of the accusations were anything more than circumstantial. And she was not actually seen doing anything wrong. She was just accused after the fact. And even after some of the post-mortems had been done by the coroners, which gave a different version, accidental death. And again, this is what the report said. Some of them sadly died simply because they're neonates who are very vulnerable, and some die anyway, sadly. So she should not have been accused of anything. There was a spike in deaths in the hospital, and it's due to other factors entirely causing these things. So what should happen now? Well, as someone commented today, it's not Lucy Letby that should be on trial. She should be released. It's the NHS and the criminal justice system itself that should be on trial. And the terrible thing is the evidence has been mounting to show that she's innocent. This is really got to be the hammer in the nail in the coffin of anybody who continues to try and say that she's guilty of anything and keep her in prison. And I'm very glad she's got new legal counsel, a new barrister, Mark MacDonald, who's already launched an application to have her case reopened and retried and relooked at, and new evidence to be submitted to the CCRC, which looks at which can open cases again, and they can refer it back to the courts to look at it again. That there should be absolutely no question that should happen, and all of the new evidence, which was not presented in the original trial, should be allowed to be given. And the dodgy evidence, like the dodgy spreadsheet, should be thrown out. And everyone should be able to see that this is the right thing that needs to happen at the moment. Now, look, I was one of the first people to speak out about this. And when I did, I actually got a lot of opposition. I even got a WhatsApp message from someone who's well known behind the scenes in the conservative side of the political spectrum, who said, you're losing a lot of support because you're talking about Lucy Letby. Stop talking about her, because people think that she's guilty, and they're pulling their support from you. But I just think if something's right, you speak about it. If something's wrong, you speak about it. And this was clearly wrong, and it's the right thing to do, to question the evidence in the trial, the verdicts, and the reaction to the verdicts, and try to push to get this looked at again. And, it's been a year and a half now since she was jailed for life. And over that time, more people have added their voices to the cause. not least Peter Hitchens, David Davis MP, Nadine Dorries, former MP, latterly Dan Wootton, very recently, I think, Toby Young, and Daily Skeptic. So, I just thank all of those people for speaking out and questioning the verdicts and questioning the evidence and saying this should be looked at again. Because if you see something's wrong and you don't speak out, then what is wrong just stays there and it is perpetuated, and there can be no resolution to this. But people who have opened their mouths and spoken out, it takes courage to do that when you're going against the stream, when you're going against the flow, and you've got the whole establishment, the courts, most of the mainstream media, the police going against you and saying that you're what do they call me? A murderer apologist. This is another smear that has been made up to just try to shut you up for speaking about something that needs to be spoken about. So, I'm glad more people who have got a larger platform than I have. I mean, I've got a fairly large platform now, but there are people obviously who've got a bigger platform than me. And they're speaking about it as well. So I'm very glad that they are. And together our voices are seeming to now be pushing through, and we can get this looked at again, and the case reopened, either a retrial or what would be far better actually is for the verdicts to just be quashed, because it's so obviously wrong. They're so obviously based on evidence which should in normal circumstances not be admissible in a court of law, because they're not up to the forensic standard and the required legal standard. But there was such I don't know what it was, a clamor, a move to actually pin these deaths on someone and make someone a scapegoat and say that this was done deliberately by a single person, a mass murderer, when clearly this wasn't the case. The sentences should be quashed and Lucy should be free to go home today. That's what should happen. It isn't going to happen today because the wheels of justice turn slowly, and if they get someone in the system, if you're caught in the system, they're hell-bent on putting you in jail, whether you're innocent or guilty. The finger is pointed at you, and then they go, right, that's the person. We're going to pin this on them, and they're going to put them in jail for as long as possible, and then, whip up hatred against them, whether they're innocent or guilty. And this is what's happened to Lucy Letby. And it should not happen to anybody ever again. But the trouble is here. In the UK, there are so many miscarriages of justice we hear about today, which makes people lose faith in the criminal justice system. And one of the most perverse things in all of this is that some people are saying, well, we shouldn't look at the case again, because if we do, people will lose faith in the justice system. That's completely the wrong, twisted, inverse way of looking at things. If you know something is wrong, if you have new evidence, you need to open the case immediately and look at that, particularly in something like Lucy Letby's case, where it's so obvious that she's been set up. You need to look at it as quickly as possible so that there's not a day more of a young, innocent woman languishing in prison. And perversely, some people will want to keep her there just for the reputation of the judges, just for the reputation of the system. Well, the system is generally good. The jury system is fantastic. But if you present dodgy evidence to the jury and you withhold evidence from the jury, which could exonerate someone who is innocent, then the system is not working. It's not because the system isn't working, but it's because it's corrupted by corrupt people. And I wonder in this case, I wonder about the people who were there, in the police, in the prosecution, and even the judge, because the judge decides what evidence can be presented and what evidence can't be presented. The judge also decides whether someone can be convicted on a majority verdict or whether the convictions have to be unanimous only, because there were only 3 of the convictions out of 14 which were unanimous. 11 of them were majority verdicts, where 1 or 2 members of the jury not absented, but had the different opinion. They didn't consent to the majority opinion. They said that she was innocent in 11 of the 14 cases. Only 3 of them there was a unanimous verdict. And the judge decides, it was on the purview of the judge in that case. If he'd have made a different decision, she would only have been convicted on 3 counts rather than 14, which again would have brought many more questions about the case and the cases, because if she was found innocent of most of them, then people would start to open up and question things on a much greater level, much, much earlier. So you have to wonder and you have to ask questions about that and why he made the decisions he did in those particular areas. Anyway, I hope that Lucy will soon be free, and I hope that the evidence has been presented by this panel of 14 global experts will be taken very seriously, and people will see that this is the real evidence that should have been presented in the first place, which would have meant she was never convicted and she never went to jail. And then we can actually have a proper inquiry, not the Thirlwall inquiry, which is going on at the moment on the basis that she's guilty and we need to do more to find out who's guilty. But on to look at why there was a spike in deaths at this particular neonatal unit, because it was chaotic and because there was sewage all over the place. And that's what will prevent another spike happening again in the future in a neonatal unit. And that's what people need to figure out ultimately for the good of parents and children in the future. Thanks for listening, everybody, and God bless you all.